Good afternoon and maybe good morning again to some of you. Thanks for continuing to join us today, and thanks for joining our Releasing Body-Worn Camera Footage, Critical Incidences, and Communicating with the Public. Again, I'm Brittany Cunningham. I'm the project manager for the Body-Worn Camera TTA program and also a site TTA analyst. As a reminder, points of view or opinions expressed herein do not necessarily represent the official position or policies of the U.S. Department of Justice. In addition, this presentation contains videos of critical incidences of officers involved shootings that may contain content of a graphic nature. As such, we do advise viewer discretion. Thank you again for joining, and I'd like to introduce you and turn it over to communication strategist and BWC expert, Laura McElroy. Laura?
Thanks so much. I'm excited to be here with you all today. Just to tell you a little bit about myself, I spent 16 years in broadcast news as a reporter and an anchor, and then I saw the light and I went to work for the good guys, and I spent 11 years as the communications director for the Tampa Police Department. And for the last 7 years, I've been out on my own as a consultant, doing a lot of work through DOJ programs such as the Body-Worn Camera TTA and others, and working for law enforcement think tanks like PERF, Major City Chiefs, IACP. And it's all about, for me, trying to bridge the gap between the community and the police officers, of really trying to build that connection. And so the first slide that I chose today to kick off our discussion, it's a quote from the father of modern policing. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with Sir Robert Peel. And I've always loved this quote. When I first became a PIO, I identified with it because I saw, as somebody coming in from the outside, that the public needs you so that they can feel safe and secure in their homes. Yet at the same time, the police need the public so that they can prevent crimes from happening and solve crimes that are taking place in the community. So I love this idea of co-producing public safety. And I feel that your body-worn camera program is an extension of your relationship with the community. It can be used as a tool, just like any other program or policy that you have, as a way to show that you are engaging your community, bringing them in, and that they are part of the solution. So whether you're dealing with building your relationship with the community, building your legitimacy in your community, or if you're trying to manage your next critical incident, that you're using all your channels of communication as really as a force multiplier, as a way to get your message out to the community, to establish, hey, we're the good guys. You can believe in us, and the power that you have bestowed upon us, the power to take away somebody's freedom, and if necessary, to use deadly force. We are worthy of that power. And using your communication tools, and when it is an incident that involves your body-worn camera, that you are still using these tools in order to get your message out. So one of the things that I've learned by working with law enforcement over the years is that you guys have a plan for everything. You train on the plan, you write the plan, then you train on the plan, and then a major incident happens. You debrief from the major incident, and then you tweak your plan. It's one of the things that impressed me so much when I first went to work for law enforcement, because in news, we just ran around like chickens with our heads cut off trying to cover breaking news. But I was so struck by the fact that there was a plan for everything. But as I spent time in law enforcement and working with agencies all over the country, small, medium, and large, I have discovered that there is one thing that law enforcement doesn't have a plan for, and that is the public messaging aspect of a critical incident. You all are experts at managing critical incidents. You do that for a living, but the public messaging of it is often something that we are thinking up on the fly, making up on the fly as that critical incident is happening. And so I've put together a 16-step plan. And what I'd like to do today is share with you a condensed version of that and how that ties into your body-worn camera video when a portion or all of it is captured, your critical incident is captured on your body-worn camera. So why do we need the crisis communication plan? Nothing reinforces the need for it like the protests that we saw after George Floyd. So this is just a slide selling you on why you really need to write down your plan. So here's more philosophy. If you'll indulge me in a little bit longer on philosophy. I've always believed that if the community feels that you share their values for their neighborhood, for their community, then they are much more likely to trust you. If they feel that you have the same priorities and the same goals for their neighborhood, then they're much more likely to see you as the good guys, And they're much more likely then to share information with you, to tweet you, to post you when something critical is happening in their neighborhood, something that doesn't fit in, that they can tell it's a miss, that they're much more likely to pick up the phone and call you and share information with you. And that you can use your body-worn camera program as a tool in order to build this trust, in order to build this common ground of we're in it together rather than us against them. So when you're dealing with an officer-involved shooting, there was one time when the question was simple. Was the individual armed, and did that person threaten the life of a police officer or a community member? But today, the world that we live in, there are much higher expectations on law enforcement. And there are a whole series of questions that come up, which is there going to be a thorough and independent investigation? If an officer has violated a policy or even worse, a law, will they be held accountable? If there is video, are you going to release that video? And on the next slide, there's a quote from the Police Executive Research Forum that tells us that that expectation from the public is a reasonable expectation, that if you're wearing a body-worn camera video, the public feels that they're entitled to see it. And there is definitely a building sentiment in law enforcement that, yes, they do have the right to see it, even if you're living in a state where it requires a judge's order before you can release it, that there are hoops you have to jump through, that ultimately the public has the right to see that video. And so as you are building your body-worn camera policy, you want to think about what's that policy going to say about us, and how is the public going to perceive us based on that policy? Does it set a tone of we're in it together, that we're co-producing public safety, that the public does have a right to see the actions of the officers during a critical incident? Does it set the tone of being open, and does it reflect the values of your community? And will it help build support for your agency during a critical incident? So I think these are some critical questions to answer as an organization as you are building your policy. At one point in time, as I said before, there was a simple set of questions, and now we're dealing with a lot more questions when it comes to a critical incident, which makes it so critically important that you have a very swift and organized approach to your critical incident. And I believe, and I have lived, and I have seen many agencies where they have a very swift and proactive approach, where they can actually earn credit with their community for policing themselves, even when it's a worst case scenario, even when you know it's a very questionable shooting, or there's actions of officers that raise serious questions. You can still earn credit with your community for being proactive. Yet, even in a situation where you have a good shoot, if you're slow and you're disorganized and you're releasing information only in a reactive mode, then it raises a lot of questions and it raises a lot of doubt in the agency, and you can lose a lot of ground during a critical incident. All that energy that goes into building that relationship can go up in smoke if you don't manage your critical incident in the right way. So I want to share this example with you. If this is an example of moving very quickly to manage your critical incident. This was an officer-involved shooting in Washington, D.C. in September after the George Floyd protests. So they'd spent the summer dealing with violent protests, violent demonstrations in their community that did a lot of damage. And so now things have calmed down. It's September. Officers are online in their version of a fusion center, and they spot these individuals who are known to law enforcement, and they are armed. And so by looking at this live feed, they identify where the individuals are, and they respond out to the scene. Within a few short seconds of being at the scene, it turns into an officer-involved shooting, and there is spontaneous protest there at the scene, at the District 7 office that's closest to the scene, and at the mayor's home. So if we can just quickly play this video, it shows how fast it turned into a riot.
Don't move! Don't move! Don't move! Don't move!
So if we pause the video, in DC, post that summer of protests, new legislation was passed that said that they must release the body-worn camera video on an officer-involved shooting within 7 days. Because of the history of that recent history over the summer, the chief chose to release it within 24 hours. They released the video in real time, which you just saw, and the next slide shows they released a slowed down version, and then they released a version just still photos like this one here, where they are showing that the individual was definitely armed. It worked. The chief in this particular case, I think it might be based on his own personal preference, but he didn't get out front and do a news conference, but he released a quote as to why he was releasing that video. And for DC, this particular incident did not tip over into violence. Their protests remained peaceful, that they had a little bit of damage on their District 7 office where some protesters damaged the front door, but that pales in comparison to the type of violence that they saw over the summer. So for them, releasing the video in this particular case worked very quickly for them, that they're living a communication value of being open and showing the community what happened in this critical incident. So when you're deciding what your policy is going to look like on releasing body-worn camera video, these are some questions that I think that you really should look at and try to answer as an executive team of when your critical incident happens, how quickly will you release it? And whatever it is that you decide, that you make sure you are consistent, that the community and the media comes to know, good, bad, or ugly, that your agency is always going to follow the same process, and they can rely on the fact that your agency will release the video and that you'll release it in a similar time frame, or then ideally the exact same time frame on each incident. And then, are you going to edit the video like DC did? Are you going to release the raw as well? You want to release the shorter version that's edited so that you can help guide the narrative and focus on the most important information, but then show the raw so that it also establishes that you have nothing to hide. Here's the video in its entirety. That's an issue that should be discussed and debated inside your organization. And then, what is your process for making sure the subject's family sees the video? Do you need to bring in any key stakeholders, special interest groups to show them that video to help build the narrative in your community? These are all things that should be discussed as you're developing this aspect of your body-worn camera policy. And now we finally get to the plan that I had promised. So the first step in your crisis communications plan is making sure that you have a system in place for monitoring social media. Social media is not just for posting those positive, happy messages on your platform to define your agency, but it's a critical tool for making sure that as a commander that you understand the totality of the circumstances of your critical incident. And that includes keeping your finger on the pulse of what is being said about your critical incident. So one of the things that I've helped agencies do is set up a team of police officers and civilians around the country. I've done this at multiple agencies where they play a role as the PIO is responding to a critical incident. They can call radio and say who's on social media duty, make contact with that officer, and that officer then is monitoring what is being said. And because they're trained to be part of a social media team, not only are they looking at what's being said, they're looking at who is saying it. Is this somebody who's a social media influencer that can really have an impact on our critical incident? Or is this somebody that has no followers and nobody's paying attention to their comments anyways? That's a very important aspect of monitoring your social and understanding how it is impacting your narrative about your critical incident. Step number 2 is establishing your agency as quickly as possible as the official source of information. On the next slide, we learned that Twitter is your best friend in a situation like that. And the very first time that we saw an agency jump out front and very assertively use Twitter to control their public messaging was the Boston bombing. And here's another example of the Pulse nightclub shooting, where Orlando establishes that there is a critical incident happening and then lets the world know, that's your local media and your national media, that all information is going to come from Twitter. And this is the official channel. We're not going to answer emails. We're not going to answer phone calls because we don't have staffing to do it. But if you want to know what's going on, this is what you follow. And it's a very proactive, assertive way of managing your public messaging of your critical incident. And then even after the critical incident, you've wrapped up your yellow tape and gone home, of maintaining that you are the official source on your cases. So this is an example out of Vallejo. They post their news releases online, and the next slide shows us that they also post the corresponding body-worn camera video that goes with those news releases. So as a member of the public or a member of the media, if I'm Googling a critical incident, if I'm Googling about an officer-involved shooting or about a protest or about a higher profile homicide, that in addition to the media sites coming up, that Vallejo website will come up. that then you maintain control over the narrative by making sure that you are the official source. I have looked at incidents at different agencies around the country where I'm Googling, and the only thing I can find is the NBC version or the ABC version or the Fox News version of what happened in their jurisdiction. I have to dig and dig and dig until I can finally find something official from the agency to understand the agency's perspective, because we don't want the local media deciding the narrative of our incidents. We want to be in that driver's seat. And so using Twitter to jump out front, and then using your website as a landing page to maintain that driver's seat on the messaging about your organization. Step number 3 is refuting false information when it comes out about your organization. And there's an example on the next slide. So again, Boston bombing was the first time that we saw this happen, where when the media was reporting that the second suspect was arrested, the PIO jumped out and said, nope, that's not correct, and reinforced, this is the official source of information. We will tell you when we make that second arrest. And as a PIO sitting at home, I was like, whoa, this is new. And so I changed very quickly in my own organization of using Twitter to really be aggressive about messaging on our critical incidents. And that's when I established having a PIO that is assigned to do nothing but to monitor social media and make sure that a false narrative is not taking root about our incident. And step number 4 is really important. I think it's one that we often don't think about when we're putting together a plan, and that is the importance of leadership emerging when there's a critical incident. When there is something happening in the community, there is fear. And I learned this firsthand when 9/11 happened. I was covering the president. He was in Florida with his brother Jeb at Sarasota Elementary School, and I was there covering the president, and he came out to brief us in the media, and he said, we are under attack, and you're either with us or against us. And in that moment, I wasn't a reporter, I wasn't a Republican, I wasn't a Democrat, I was a person, and I was afraid, and I would have followed my president anywhere. And from that life experience as a reporter, I understood when I went to work for the Tampa Police Department, the importance of filling the vacuum in that moment when people are afraid, when there's protests going on and they're fearful that maybe their business is going to be damaged, or there's shootings happening. And is the next shooting going to happen in their neighborhood? That on a much smaller scale than 9/11, when these critical incidents happen, there is fear in the community. And that is the time for a leader to emerge, to be out front and be the voice of calm and instill a sense of strength in the community that we're going to get through this together. And using your body-worn camera at that time can be a form of leadership, of showing the community what exactly happened and how you're going to handle it. So step number 4 is making sure that you have one voice to unite your community, a voice of strength to instill that calm and a sense of security to the community. So this is an example of where your body-worn camera policy can directly impact your critical incident. In Sacramento, they had an officer-involved shooting where 2 white officers shot and killed an unarmed black male. Turned out he had a cell phone in his hand. And I think I use this example here on step 4 because of the leadership that was demonstrated by this police chief. There's protests immediately after the shooting takes place. The chief moves very quickly and releases the body-worn camera. He releases the video within 24 hours. He releases the video expecting that is going to help de-escalate the community, but a whole new round of protests comes up because they had not addressed in their policy when they could mute their audio. And so as a result, it appeared that they were trying to cover something up, as the officers are saying, turn off your audio, turn off your audio, instead of having a process of how you turn off your audio and what language you use as you were saying, we're now shutting down our audio. And so 1, this slide demonstrates the importance of addressing that in your policy. But 2, the next slide, I believe, has an example of the chief really using his communication to build trust and to establish that voice of calm and to de-escalate his community.
You released the videos yesterday as an effort to make your department more transparent, but you look at what is clearly a lot of anger right now in the streets, and it's hard to say whether that increased trust at all with your department.
Yeah, I think it it did, and I think it will continue to do that. But this is a tragic event for our entire community. So yes, there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of questions, there's a lot out there that is very emotional. But I have seen some of the conversations change since we've had that video released to the facts of the case as opposed to filling in the facts because there's a void of facts. And so I think that's a positive change. Obviously, people are still very angry, and we expected them to still be angry because they still don't have all the answers, and just releasing the video doesn't change that.
You expected the anger. Do you understand it?
Yeah, I do understand it. But again, I think at some point we have to evolve to where we have a tremendous amount of trust between law enforcement and the community, so people trust that we do a thorough investigation and will come to the just outcomes. And clearly we're not there right now because you see what is going on right now, but we will continue to work towards that.
One of the things that I love about how this chief handled this critical incident is he doesn't do the big news conference when he releases the video. He makes the rounds individually to all the media outlets. He makes them the 10 o'clock news on the day of the release, and this is the morning news the morning after the release. And so I would just ask you to think about, what message does that send to every member of that media outlet when the chief walks in the door on the heels of protests and a high-profile critical incident? The level of transparency and accountability is immeasurable, and how that goes so far in building trust in the organization that, yes, we are the good guys and you can trust us. You can trust us to make sure we have a fair and independent investigation when we have something happen that causes protests and causes a lot of questions in our community. And so I believe that he did an excellent job of showing his community that he has nothing to hide. Did he answer questions about the critical incident and the details of what happened? No, he can't, because it was so fresh. So he certainly would be inappropriate and too early to talk about the details of the case. But what he does an excellent job of is continually bringing it back to his key message of, it's up to us to show you that you can trust us and that we are an organization that you can believe in, and we are committed to building that relationship and being open. So I love this example of showing leadership and also reinforcing the importance of having a process for dealing with your audio as well as the release of video. And the next step 5, is when things don't go right, that you stand up and call a spade a spade. In law enforcement, we often are focused on holding information close to the vest. You can tell them this, but don't tell them that. And unfortunately, that's a bit like peeling back an onion. And we all know what happens when you peel an onion, you cry. It's a painful process. And dripping out one piece of your story, one piece of your critical incident at a time, what it does is it generates story after story, and that you stay in the headlines, you stay the lead story online or on television. So step number 5 is, when it doesn't look good and you know that it's not going to get better with time, that you just release it, take your lump and move on. So here's an example of doing that out of LA. I'm sure you guys are familiar with their community briefings. Typically the community briefings are done if there is a death or serious injury. And in this particular case, they didn't have serious injury or death. Normally it's done by a commander of the area of responsibility of where the incident happened. In this one, it's done by the chief himself. The law says they have to release within 45 days. This one was done within a week. So it all starts with the cell phone video. So let's watch a short clip of the cell phone video that started this. Okay, we pause the video. Just to give you a quick background, this individual was living in a vacant building. The 911 call was from the owner of the building saying, "Code is breathing down my neck. I got to get this individual out of my property. Can you help me remove him from the property?" And then this is a cell phone video that is captured by the neighbor of the officer interaction. Here is the video from the chief where he talks about that video.
I am committed to transparency and accountability in this investigation. I feel compelled to release the body-worn video and other information about this incident. incident. I, along with many of you, watched the third-party video that was released last week, and I have serious concerns. Any use of force, justified or not, is difficult to watch, but this one is disturbing. However, one video does not tell the whole story, and I'll not pass judgment on this case until all the evidence is collected, witnesses are interviewed, and the investigation is complete. I've taken steps to protect the interests of the public by removing the officer's peace officer powers, and I've assigned him to home, pending the outcome of this investigation. Here's a brief overview of what occurred.
So I share this particular case with you because I think the chief did a beautiful job of walking the line between public accountability and calling a spade. Watching this video is a difficult thing to do. He said what everybody at home is thinking, which is, that video is disturbing. So he connects with his community, empathizes with his community, responds in the way that the community would also see that video. But then over here, he doesn't lose his internal audience because he doesn't throw the officer under the bus. He doesn't convict him. He says that one video does not tell the whole story. And I'm going to now conduct a thorough investigation to get any unanswered questions dealt with. So I feel like he just does a really good job of walking the line between that public accountability issue and the issue of not losing the cops by throwing that officer under the bus. And step number 6 is making sure that you communicate with your internal audience. When you have your critical incident, that you already have a process in place for pushing out your internal messaging, that they are not the forgotten stepchild that finds out about everything from the media, that you either have a blog set up or a vlog where the chief tapes something on camera right before he or she goes out to do his or her news conference, or if it's an email that is drafted by somebody in the agency and the chief can edit it on the fly, but there is a process in place so you are communicating with your internal audience simultaneous, if not a few moments before you are communicating with the public. And then step number 7 is being proactive with your body-worn camera video, of having a process for getting your story out there when the critical incident happens. And as I mentioned before, of making sure that you are consistent, good, bad, or ugly, that the public can come to rely on your agency and know what the time frame is going to be that they are going to see that video. So I want to share this example with you out of Orlando. And this is as the demonstrations started to get ugly in Orlando after the George Floyd protests. So let's just show this video. And the little circles show each time that a frozen water bottle or a rock is thrown at a police officer. So if the media is videotaping this, what they would visually be able to see is the tear gas. That's what would be visual and that would end up on the news. But they're not going to be able to see each individual thing that is being thrown at the officers. That establishes that this is more than a peaceful protest. This is getting ugly for the police. So they released the video and then they posted on their website the edited clip. So you see the first one, clip 11 from body cam 9. That is the edited version that helps manage the narrative that police were facing aggressive individuals that were trying to harm the police, that it was not just a peaceful protest. And then a few lines down, you see body cam 9. That is the raw version of that video. So we're open and accountable. Here's the raw, but here's the edited version so that we can show you the rest of the story. The portions that you wouldn't be able to see with your own camera being held back from where the actual incident is, they would never be able to see the rocks and bottles being thrown at the officers. So this is being very proactive in your release of body-worn camera video and strategic in how you release it. So here's another example. If you play this video, you'll see an officer as his nose is broken during the incident. And I put that in there to show what Orlando did. Here's an officer who suffers a broken nose. That establishes what the officers are facing during the incident. And then they push that out on the same night that it happened. This is not just a peaceful protest. And so when we're using tear gas and when we're using force, it's because we're trying to control a dangerous situation. And then I always would say and joke when I worked at the Tampa Police Department that officers should always rescue the kitten and when necessary, carry a throwdown kitten. And so when I recently saw this video from my alma mater, I thought I have to share this because it's a great example of the value of rescuing the kitten.
I almost had her. think we got Corporal still here. Huh? Corporal still almost close.
Got her.
Got her. Yeah? Yes.
You got her? You got her?
Where's the baby? This poor little thing. Oh, hello. Can I go give her a bath? Absolutely. All right.
Okay, so you get the point. The importance of rescuing the kitten. I was interviewing a PIO candidate for an agency this morning, and she spoke about having a system in place where officers and supervisors can tag body-worn camera video for the PIO office as potential release to the public, because the public doesn't know all the good things that officers are doing on a daily basis. And your body-worn camera video can be an avenue for letting the community see the good things that don't end up on the news, that show the community why they should believe in you and why they can trust you. So yes, it's very effective for managing your critical incidents, but it's also an important tool for your daily activity of building that relationship with the community and softening your image and showing the community that your officers care. They care about the kiddies, they care about the community they serve. And when no one is looking, that they're going to do the right thing. And that's why we can share our body-worn camera video with you, because we have nothing to hide. So before we open it up to questions, I just want to quickly run through different styles of releasing body-worn camera video. So starting on the next slide, we see the LA version. And I think a lot of us are familiar with their community briefing. And the first question that comes to mind is, how do you afford something like this? It's very well done, and it is an excellent way of managing your narrative. But there are two things that raise questions, and that is, how long does it take? Is it going to take 30 days? Is it going to take 45 days? Is it going to take a couple of months? And how do you come up with the funding to be able to do this and the skill set? So let's just play the video real quickly and just look at a portion of it.
He was later identified as Jose Chavez, a 24-year-old resident of Los Angeles. Officers tried to talk with him, but he did not respond to any of the officers' questions. Both of the officers who responded to this call were wearing LAPD-issued body-worn video cameras. These cameras are worn on the chest of the officers and captured the interaction with Chavez soon after the officers arrived on scene. Here's the body-worn video footage from the passenger officer. You are going to see him trying to communicate with Chavez, and he asked Chavez several times whether he was okay. He also asked if he needs any medical attention. Chavez does not respond and instead stands silently in the roadway at a distance.
Hey, bud. Hey. Hey, you vives por aquí or what? You live around here? Everything good?
So we can go ahead and pause the video. So this video, as a PIO, when I first saw the community briefing, I was like, that's beautiful. It gets in the driver's seat on the messaging. You have the ability to really narrate what is happening. You do a play-by-play. But then I step over into my other role as a reporter for a long time, and I look at it and go, why is it so well produced? Why is it so edited? What did they leave out? Why do they need to edit it so much? What are they not telling us about? So, and they have faced that criticism in LA. I think ultimately the good outweighs the bad, but this may not be, from a budget perspective, an option for smaller agencies that don't have the staffing or the skill set or the money to be able to put together these videos. But this is one version, highly produced, very well done community briefing. And then the next slide shows us the extreme opposite. The Seattle version is they dump everything connected to their critical incident within 24 hours. It started out within 24 hours and it worked that way for years. They're moving toward more of a 72-hour release. But either way, it is a raw dump of the body-worn camera video, of surveillance video, of 911 calls, photos from the scene, photos of the suspect, of the weapon, and everything is dumped out in very short order. The benefit is it has helped build trust in the Seattle Police Department inside the community. That's the feedback I get from commanders that I've talked to about it. But it doesn't give them the ability to have a big impact on the narrative because it's a raw dump with a limited news release that goes along with it. And then the third example is from the Las Vegas Police Department. And what I like about this is it kind of walks the line between the well-produced LA and the raw dump from Seattle. So on day one out at the scene, there's an initial briefing which Seattle does as well. Very basic information. And then in Las Vegas, on the third day, they have a live news conference where they're going to release like the mugshot, this aerial photo. I think the next photo shows the weapon that the individual used. And so I want to play a short clip on the next slide from Las Vegas as they are doing a live play-by-play on day 3 where they are dumping the video, body-worn camera video and surveillance footage.
This will be his body-worn camera footage.
Unit for the Chelsea Chapter 53 and the 411 A exercise at full 6700 North Durango.
Get in front of the car. In front of the car. Get in front of the car right now. This car! Of course! Hands on top of your head. Get in front of the car. Foot pursuit! Get on the ground! Get on the ground! Inside! We got 113!
So in this video, slow down, you'll see Russo and the gun in his rear waistband. He pulls it out with his right hand and comes back and points it back at Officer Burr. And that's when Officer Burr fired his weapon. Here's some still shots of while the foot pursuit. You can see the gun in his rear waistband. I'll now open it up for any questions that you might have.
So those are 3 different examples. I think all 3 have benefits. I think the most important takeaway is deciding what works for your agency and then stick with it. That you establish a process and a policy that the public can rely on, the media can rely on, that will de-escalate the media because they know they're going to get it from the police department in a consistent fashion, again, whether it's good, bad, or ugly. And the last slide summarizes the steps of the plan that I shared with you today of making sure you're monitoring your social media, that you act quickly to establish your agency as the official source of information, that you have a process in place for refuting false information, and be proactive, especially when you feel that your agency is in the wrong, when something has not gone well, that you take proactive measures to get in front of it, and that you communicate with your internal audience. The next slide is a quote from the first chief who I ever worked for, and that is that we're as strong as our relationship with our community. And for me, just like the quote from Sir Robert Peel, this really summarizes what it's about for law enforcement. And then using your body-worn camera program as a tool to build that relationship and asking yourself, what does our policy say about us as an organization? And does it bring the community in and give them a voice and co-produce public safety for our community? So I know we have several questions, so I want to turn it over to the moderator so we can answer some of those questions.
Thanks, Laura. I see that there is one question we have so far, and let me read it out to you from Patrice in Cumberland. In North Carolina, we're required to get court ordered to release footage. There have been some issues with local agencies and judges requesting the footage to be edited/redacted before releasing, and they're not permitted to release the raw footage. Are agencies adding a watermark to the footage so they're clearly being identified as the original source, or is there some other method agencies are using?
So I have seen agencies using the watermark. I do think it is a great idea because it establishes, as you said, that you are the official source on your critical incident. And I've also worked with an agency in North Carolina during a critical incident, and we ended up releasing a still photo that established that the individual was armed. And we were able to release that still photo even before we had the judge's order to release the video. So I think no matter what the statutes are regulating your process of trying to think outside the box to come up with a creative solution, establishing your relationship on the front end with your district attorney or your union or your mayor that may try to stop you from releasing the body-worn camera, and having those conversations early on so that you can exercise your leadership when the critical incident happens. And so I know there are states where there are great limitations, and I think doing the work on the front end to try to have a relationship that you can rely on during the critical incident, that you can come up with a solution outside the box.
Thanks, Laura. Well, thanks so much, Laura, for a great presentation. As everyone can see, there are many things to think about when releasing footage around transparency, accountability, and kind of controlling your own story, as Laura mentioned, and doing that in the right ethical way that you need to do that. So thank you for your time, Laura. We really appreciate it. It was a great presentation. Actually, I do see one more question that maybe we can get to, and then we will close out. So the question is, what are your suggestions for smaller agencies that do not have resources that larger agencies do?
Well, I think going back to the consistency of coming up with a process that is logistically feasible for you, and then making sure that you follow that process. So if trying to turn the video around quickly is difficult because of limitation in staffing and just not having the bandwidth to do that, then maybe it doesn't come out in 3 days, but maybe you have the time. So maybe it takes 2 weeks, maybe it takes a month for your organization, but letting your community know this is the way we'll do it. Because we're small, we're not able to do it quickly, but we will always do it the same way. And so in Las Vegas, there was a threat of a consent decree on that organization, and they were the first city to go through collaborative reform. And in that process, at that time, they didn't release anything. And so when they had a critical incident that nature. And so there was a lot of criticism of the organization. And even though it was a 3-day delay, which is not as fast as some organizations do it, the community accepted it because it was consistent. And I think in smaller organizations that you can establish, we can't do it that fast. This is what we can do and that we can do consistently. And so whatever you come up with that works for your organization, of just being consistent.
Thank you, Laura. And thanks again for your time. Great presentation. So thank you all again. And Laura, thank you again.
Thanks, everybody.